Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and the modders have done it again. We've got a brand new faction to play with, which is going to be a quite different take on the Skaven. So if you like Skaven content, you're definitely going to like this. It just released yesterday actually. This is Clan Vrrtkin, which is a warlord clan under Clan Scryer. They've been sent to do their bidding and yeah, it changes their playstyle. You're not going to be playing like a typical Clan Scryer army. So let's talk about everything. First, let's go into the faction effects. Diplomatic relations plus 20 with the faction of Clan Scryer. Ammunition and research plus 5% for Clan Vrrtkin for each active war against the Skaven. So the more Skaven factions you're fighting, the better your research rate. Chance of intercepting an army using the underway, beast paths, or world routes plus 25% for all characters faction-wide. Construction cost minus 50% for weapons dump, weapons borrow, and arsenal buildings. And for the Lord effects, we had the following: armor plus 13 for globadiers, bombardiers, poison wind mortar, and globe claw catapult units. This is a new unit. Recruit rank plus 2 for globadier, bombardier, poison wind mortar, and globe claw catapult units for Lord's army. Upkeep minus 13% for globadier, bombardier, poison wind mortar, and globe claw catapult units in Lord's army. And finally, enemy leadership minus 6 for enemy armies in local province. Now, as you can already tell, this is going to focus a lot on poisoned wind type of weaponry. Yes, you're going to be breaking the Geneva Convention multiple times with this army, even more so than you would normally do with a Skaven. So, with that being said, let's just jump into campaign. So we'll be starting off in the lands of Naldor, which is quite far from other major Skaven clans, considering that Tretch has recently, well, not recently, but a year ago was moved to his lawful start position. This means that you're pretty much alone and you will be fighting against other Skaven factions. The sky's the limit. You can go northward and start dealing with Malekith, Taurox, and pretty much everything up there. You can go eastward and deal with Morathi, who might be a bit of a problem, or you can go south and start dealing with the Lizardmen. You've got choices on movement and you've got some security. You'll start off at war with one Skaven faction, but from there it's pretty much smooth sailing. So your Legendary Lord is fairly unique, as he'll focus on a hybrid of range and melee, no spellcasting, and what he's going to be able to do is get up close and personal and really throw out some damage. When it comes to his own unique skill line, he's going to increase your faction's capabilities. He's going to be able to get you more trade bonuses, extra research rates, quite high at that, some food generated faction-wide, some growth for all your provinces. You're going to be able to become quite the terror very, very early on, and also reduce the upkeep further to a lot of your mainstay units like globadiers and bombardiers to a very dramatic cost reduction, which means that you're going to be able to have a full army of them and do as much damage as possible. Obviously, keep in mind that those units might take a while to recruit, but they will be very beneficial for you, as globadiers will now be considered a core unit for you. You'll also be picking up some abilities as you start progressing for your campaign. These will not just be available to your Lord, but also your new type of hero too, which is going to make you quite dangerous. Let's just put it that way, and you'll see a bit more of that as we start progressing through this video. You'll also have a new hero variant known as the Master Globadier. This one's going to have very similar skills to your Legendary Lord, but also have access to a new form of Law of Magic. The Law of Magic itself is going to work in a similar sense, kind of to the Law of Plagues, but also kind of to the Law of Ruin. It's a little bit of a mix with its own unique style. You'll still get access to Vermintide though, and the spells itself will differentiate you from the other types of Skaven out there. The idea is to give you more technomancy, which at the end of the day is something quite important, especially to the Skaven of Clan Scryer. So if anything, you can call it the second Law of Ruin, just an expansion to it. You've got damage spells, you've got debuffs, pretty much everything that you'll need, especially if you're going to be playing in an aggressive sense, which, well, you're playing Skaven, so if you're not playing aggressively, you're not really playing the true Skaven experience. Swarm the world, that's what you want to be able to do. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the Master Globadier is your new addition, and you will lose out on Graciers and so on, which kind of makes sense. Those Lord options would be gone as you are a Warlord clan, so you'd be dealing mostly with Warlock Masters or Skaven Warlords. But the Globadier more than pays for it, as you get access to some skills which will once again reduce the upkeep quite heavily to your Globadiers and so on, making them very, very cheap. You're going to be using more elite units than you will be using, say, hero squads. At least that's how I've been playing myself. Construction will very much be the same for the Skaven. Keep in mind that there are some new buildings, and there's a landmark here and there's a landmark somewhere else that I'll let you discover, but the main thing is that it's supposed to still feel like a Skaven faction, and you do have the warp gas refinery, which is very, very powerful. It'll even reduce, again, the upkeep of your Globadiers, Bombardiers, Poison Wind Mortars, and Globe Core Catapults, making them much, much more worth it, as you're going to be using them as a core unit once again. Keep in mind that a lot of your normal Skaven units have also been replaced, as you're not really using traditional clan rats and traditional, well, storm vermin. You're actually using a more clan Scryer-inspired army, some stuff that you might have seen on the tabletop where people would do some heavy kit bashes. You'll also have access to an extension to your tech tree, which is going to focus around getting you some bonuses faction-wide, for example, extra control and so on, local recruitment capacity, extra income from tariffs, and also some diplomatic bonuses when it comes to the other major Skaven clans, in case you're expanding very heavily and you won some friends there. You'll also get some major buffs towards your Globadiers, once again, proving them to be your core unit. But your clan rats, your shock rats, and your storm vermin will be quite good for this too. The main one is the ammunition bonus for pretty much all your stuff, because ammunition is going to be very important here, even with clan rats, as you're going to be focusing on a short range kind of skirmishing combat. Again, lots of gas attacks, and we're going to be getting into that quite heavily once we start talking about the roster. Now, lastly, a large number of your units in your roster can also be upgraded. This will give them stuff like Unbreakable and extra physical resistance, but sometimes give them Rampage. Very much depends on what you want, and it obviously does depend on the actual unit. It does cost food, so that's something that you're going to have to keep in mind, as these bonuses are very strong, but food at the very beginning is not that easy to come by, especially if you're going to, you know, start upgrading a lot of settlements that you capture just to be able to get some big bonuses. So keep that in mind, or else you can find yourself in a position where you've upgraded a bunch of troops and then you're in the red. As if memory serves, there's not too many pastures around the northern territories, and you're going to have to start pushing your way down south to try and find a few others. Now we're going to talk about the roster. So the Skaven roster is already gigantic as it stands. I mean, yeah, it's the Skaven, but if you scroll down all the way to extended roster, you'll see a bunch of new troops. This is basically going to replace all your standard stuff. You won't have standard storm vermin, you won't have standard clan rats, you won't have pretty much a lot of the basic units will be replaced with the Vrrtkin version. We're not going to talk about all the units, as they'll fill a lot of the same function. The stats won't be too varied, but there's a few things that we do need to talk about. So you can see there are some minor stat differences, obviously, when you compare, say, for example, the Skaven slaves, where we got the Vrrtkin version and we got the standard version. Generally, how it stands is the standard version will actually have more HP, but the Vrrtkin versions will have more range damage, more range capabilities, and so on, even have some better effects. And yeah, this is basically what's going to differentiate you, but it'll be more noticeable as we start looking towards other units. For example, clan rats for you will have no shields. Yeah, no shields whatsoever. They're not really much of a defensive faction, and the new version of them, the ones that would have the shields, instead have globes. You will also notice contact effects for both range and melee. This is something that you're going to see repeated throughout your roster, and you're going to be able to do a lot of damage. You're going to put a lot of debuffs on the enemy. This is an aggressive faction. This is one that you actually would want in melee. These are Skaven that are going to be able to be up close and personal and go toe-to-toe with a lot of enemy factions. The leadership is decent, mind you, still not great, so you're going to need to be able to boost them up through other means too. You'll see a lot of classic units reimagined. For example, shock rats are the Vrrtkin version of plague monks, and these ones will have the same functionality, but also with a little bit of a death globe up there. They're anti-infantry, they can do a lot of damage. Your storm vermin are here too. Your storm vermin are going to be able to do a lot. They've got some fancy new halberds, which is more like a sickle. Again, they'll have those contact effects, which will make them very, very strong. And the standard variant will not have a shield, but instead throw a globe in prior. You can upgrade their ammunition through the tech tree, as explained before. And further to that, stuff like, say, Doom Wheels and your Helper Abominations will have leaky tanks, so they'll be able to do some damage to anything around them and also convey some debuffs to the enemy, making them far more useful than they would be in vanilla. So they'll be much, much better. You'll be using them a lot more often. I've been using a lot of Doom Wheels in my armies. Not so much the Helper Abomination, because I find it a little bit slow compared, but it does also depend on you as the player. Carriers of the Immaculate Fume will replace your Plague Sensor Bearers. They'll have very similar functionality again with those strong contact effects, magical attacks, and so on. It's more to have that Clan Scryer type feel, and you can see that here. They look really, really cool. Obviously, everything kind of looks like a Globadier. Again, it takes me back to this army I once saw on the tabletop, which was literally just Clan Scryering all the Skaven units, giving them their own fluff and feel. You will have access to a completely new unit for the all-Skaven faction known as the Great Mortars. This is a mortar unit, so yeah, there's not really too much to talk about here, but it does give you some more artillery focus, which at the end of the day, it's kind of what you want anyway as, yeah, Skaven, right? Globe Rain catapults are going to be quite different to your standard Plague Claws. You see, the Plague Claw is there to do a lot of damage very, very quickly. This is why a lot of people use them. However, the Globe Rain focuses on debuffing the enemy. However, it doesn't focus on singular units. It actually focuses on a wide spread. You can see this firing, and yeah, there's a bunch of them, but even say, for example, one Globe Rain catapult unit could, in theory, affect 4-5 units of enemies, even more so if you're dealing with a choke point where all the enemies are packing up together. Damage will be done, but in a more spread out way, whereas here it's going to slow them down. It's going to allow you to be able to shoot more with, say, for example, Jezzails, and you're going to just in general do a lot more damage. So this more or less has been the usual army comp that I will use when it comes to Vrrtkin. A bunch of Storm Vermin up front because they're able to do a lot of damage. You will also notice that your Globadiers, not only your Death Globes, but your standard ones too, will also have 80 entities instead of the usual, which I think was around 48, making them fairly decent as a front line. If you want to have a front line of them, it's more than capable, especially once you start getting some other modifiers, which is going to reduce their upkeep quite tremendously. There's definitely a lot of ways for you to be able to play with this faction. Ultimately, yes, it's a Skaven faction, but it does have its own feel to it. I like using Globadiers, especially because they're not like the tabletop. In the tabletop, there was a lot of chances for them to, well, misfire, which was a big thing with the Skaven roster. Here, they become much more potent. You can use a bunch of them as a front line. Generally, I like using some Storm Vermin supported by Death Globes, whilst getting some long-range supporting fire from just some Jezzails. The army would obviously be a lot larger in a normal campaign situation, but this is custom battles, and we know how that goes. If I give myself too much, then the enemies will have way too much, and it's kind of annoying. But yeah, I like this. It's definitely something if you want to play another Skaven faction, if you want to play something quite different. The mod itself can be found in the description below. Make sure that you get the sub-mods too. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion, because, you know, it's always fun to talk about Skaven. I'll let the rest of the battle play out so you can see how this army kind of works, and with all that being said, there might be a few frame drops here and there. I have noticed that patch 3.1 has kind of led to a few issues more than regular in the game. Hopefully it won't take too long until that gets fixed up. But with all that being said, there is a new faction that you can play around with, so you might as well have a little bit of fun. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.
Yes! Warp blades charged! Warp launch, Jesse! At once! Rocket boom! Make blood!